Hey, thanks, Rich. Thanks, Ann. And thanks for everyone who's joining. In these tough times, it's all remote, and I can't be there in person, so I can't gauge whether I'm being funny or insightful or if people just are falling asleep. So I hope that everyone can enjoy or at least get something out of my presentation today. So thanks for joining. If I miss a slide that I'm talking about something that doesn't make sense on the slide, I'll try to work it out with Ann, but I'm going to tell her that next slide will be our tool to try to do this since I can't see. I downloaded the app on my cell phone, but I'm just going to go for it like this because I can see the presentation in front of me. So thanks. I'm area director with OSHA in the Cleveland area office. I've been here since 2011. I've been with OSHA since 1988. And it's been a nice ride. I really didn't know who OSHA was when I first signed up for this job. I just knew I needed a job, but I've really enjoyed making a difference, I hope, on safety and health in the workplace. We are an enforcement agency, and we are at work right now. Thankfully, I'm very appreciative of the fact that I do have a job in these tough times, and I hope and wish the best for all you companies that are on here too. So I'll go ahead and start. Second slide says why work safely. I always start my presentations with telling you a little bit about myself and why I work safely, because I think it's important in your company to personalize safety. It's a lot of statistics I'm going to show you, but each person that gets killed or gets injured is a real person that it affects their family and their home life. So it's important that we try to keep it personal. So my way of keeping it personal is introducing you a couple things. Next slide, Ann. This is a tag, if you can see it. That is my dad, William Eberts. He died in October 2008 and was cremated. We took him out and put his ashes in a very special place. And I wanted to include him because he was the first person that really taught me safety. And he was on the fact about wearing your seatbelt before it was even a law, but he wouldn't let anybody drive in his car if they didn't have their seatbelt on. He was very dialed in about that thing. The only person he let ride in the car was his mother-in-law. She was adamant that she would not wear a seatbelt, and he was not about to argue with her, so he did let her. But other than that, my dad was a great person, and I really miss him. The next slide, go ahead, Ann, is my brother Mike putting his ashes in a lake in Canada. He always wanted to get a lodge in Canada and run a fishing lodge, but now he gets to be up there, his ashes forever. But I did want to mention his dad because I hope to emulate him in my life. The next slide, number 5. That's part of the estrogen-dominated household that I live in. I have 5 daughters, 2 female dogs, a female cat, and a lizard that's probably female. So that kind of explains some of my weirdness maybe. But I love them all. Kristen, bottom right, Lauren, bottom left, they're my 2 oldest. Wisest. Then I've got the twins on the right, Olivia and Alexa, and Madison on the left up on the top. I put that slide in today because we tried to recreate this on Mother's Day this weekend, and we went outside to the neighbor's swing set. We wanted to recreate this because my kids are older. My twins are actually 13 now. But as soon as we went out there, there was a microburst of weather that blew all this stuff across the yard and started blowing like crazy. So we didn't get to reenact it. But those are my daughters. I love them to death, and it's neat to have somebody to work for. You know, work safely for somebody in your life. Everybody has a hobby or something that makes them complete, and that's my family. The next slide, number 6, that's my lovely wife, Lisa. She puts up with me, and she was our celebration there on Mother's Day. Really appreciate everything she does. She's been sewing masks for the COVID. She's at home with the kids as she homeschools them, the 3 of them. The 2 older are out of the house, but She's a very special person, and I'm very fortunate. Now, the next slide, number 7, that is my oldest daughter, Kristen. I am about to have my first grandkid. She is due in June, and yes, it's confirmed that I am getting the first boy in my family. So a little shot of testosterone I'm pretty excited about. That's her dude Danny on the right, in the room they fixed up. She's having her baby in June, but it's all weird with this COVID. You know, mom can't be in the room with her when she gives birth. She hasn't been able to have baby showers, so it's kind of crazy the way this pregnancy's going. But anyhow, that gives you a little glimpse into the Eberts family and what drives me and motivates me to work safe each day. So next slide, Ann. Our current Secretary of Labor is Eugene Scalia. He is the big boss for me. We are the U.S. Department of Labor in the state of Ohio. About half the states in the U.S. are run by the federal government, and the other states run their own programs. So in our region, which is Region 5, we have Ohio, Wisconsin, and Illinois that are U.S. Department of Labor, OSHA, that enforce OSHA for OSHA regulations for the state of Ohio. And Indiana, Michigan, and Minnesota run their own programs. So they're a state agency and they run that. So if you recognize that last name, he is the son of the Supreme Court Justice Antoine, I think it's Antoine Scalia, or Antonio, I can't remember. But anyhow, he is our Secretary of Labor, and he does support OSHA, which is really cool. The next slide is the actual boss of OSHA. We do not have a Secretary of OSHA, which is crazy. This is the first time in our administration that I've been working has not had acting assistant secretary for OSHA. So we have a deputy assistant. This is Lauren Sweat. She's a former senior policy advisor for the House Committee on Education and the Workforce, and she has learned a lot in a very brief time. Actually been here almost 3 years now, but she is the head, and she is doing a great job in a tough time right now, as we're all trying to do. Next slide. This shows you the staff of OSHA. OSHA is a very small agency compared to a lot of the agencies out there. Our overall budget for the entire country is less than $600 million, which seems like a lot, but it's really not that much in the grand scheme of things. I think EPA's budget's over $20 billion. So OSHA is a very small agency, so we have to target our resources where we're most effective. Right now we have about 1,800 staff that affects over 130 million workers. So there's about one compliance officer for every 130,000 workers out there. So there's not a lot of us. There's 10 regional offices. We are part of Region 5, which is run out of Chicago, and there's 90 local area offices across the country. Next slide, Ann. This shows the Ohio offices. There are currently 57 OSHA inspectors, compliance officers in the state of Ohio for over 5 million workers. We have 4 area offices: Toledo, Columbus, Cleveland, and Cincinnati. So we have 4 offices that run and cover the state of Ohio with 57 compliance officers. Next slide. This is a map of the state of Ohio, and it shows how we're divided up on counties and the boundaries we have. So in the upper right-hand corner is the Cleveland area office. That's our jurisdiction. We have 12 counties, and we have the most workers, and we have the most compliance officers. Right now we have 16 compliance officers for our section up there. We have a lot of manufacturing. If you work up here, you know that. And so I really cheer hard for our manufacturers. And when Mr. Dawson asked me to speak, I do appreciate your guys' interest towards safety and health, and it is very important. I'm going to show you some statistics on where we're finding people getting killed, where we're finding people getting seriously injured, and where you can target your safety and health program to prevent that. Because as we go on and deal with this COVID, which I'll talk about as well, it would suck to survive COVID and only to be killed on the job. and a workplace injury that's entirely preventable. So that's our jurisdictional boundaries and our phone numbers. Next slide is OSHA's continuing mission. Every year we still have more than 4,500 Americans die, and a lot of people, over 50,000, die from illnesses. So it's important what we do, and we're trying to prevent and reduce injuries and illnesses in the workplace. The next slide is the latest Bureau of Labor Statistics stats. I'm going to go through these pretty quick, but you can see since 2014 through 2018, we've had a slight rise in the number of fatal work injuries. And if you look in the kind of maroon or reddish at the top, those are self-employed workers that have been killed. A trend you'll see that I'll show you is that smaller companies have a disproportionate number of fatal injuries and serious injuries on the job, and it affects them a lot more. But why do you think that is? Obviously, it's a big factor is they don't have the resources to hire a full-time safety. So it's important that you focus on safety, even if you're a small company. Next slide. This tells by the age group. As you go down on the chart, it goes to older people. You can see from the, I don't know if that's peach, which is age 45 to 54, and ages 55 to 65 and older have accounted for a much larger percentage of the fatalities we're investigating. So people are working longer, and also I think there's a heightened risk factor from either people overextending in what they're trying to do, or also maybe they're set in their ways to a certain extent and don't worry about safety as much. So I think there's several factors, but keep an eye on your aging workforce is my point with this slide. Next slide. This tells about the events. The single most deadly event and the single most dangerous thing we can do each day is climb in our car and drive to work or drive someplace. Still, transportation incidents are the highest. Next up is violence, and then over in the green, and then falls, slips and trips, contact with objects, exposure to harmful substances, and fires and explosions. So next slide. This shows you the types of injuries over the last 5 years in counts. You can see there's a trend. Exposure to harmful substances and environments has gone up in the last 5 years each year. Falls, slips, and trips has stayed fairly steady. Contacts with objects up a little bit. Workplace violence is something we don't do a whole lot of, but unfortunately, it's a big thing that we have to be aware of out there. So next slide. This is slide 18. This is the type of industry where we're seeing the most fatalities. The top one is construction. And the way our agency addresses this is we try to conduct about half our inspections each year in the construction industry because it continues to have the highest number of fatal incidents. Transportation and warehousing is next. And it's interesting because transportation and warehousing is growing. It's growing a lot, as you see, and especially with this COVID. All the warehousing and transportation that's going on with the online orders. This is a very high industry for serious incidents. And if you have in your facility, you know, where you're transporting or material handling, the forklifts, the loading docks, those are all points of interest that you want to keep an eye on. Next slide. This talks about the major occupational groups, so transportation and material moving, that's over the road, and distribution and warehouse. Construction workers second, service industries third. That includes like tree trimmers, landscaping, which seems to be a high fatality job, risk job. So next slide, slide 20. This talks about the distribution by gender. Contacts with the objects and equipment, though, the women are a lot lower, but unfortunately women are a lot higher on the workplace homicides. A lot of that is relational targeted homicides. So next slide. These are when they talk about the most dangerous jobs to have with the highest chance for people to get killed. this is where they get this stat from. So logging workers, cutting down trees, that's one of the most hazardous. It is the most hazardous in the rate of fatalities per workers out there. Fishing, most dangerous catch, which is a really cool show that I like to watch. That is very dangerous too. Aircraft pilots and flight engineers is third, and then roofers, number 4. Roofers we target all the time in construction. It's small companies, they're supposed to have fall protection, they rarely use it. They're probably in my office disputing, well, not in my office anymore, but virtually disputing citations a lot, but we continue to target them because they continue to have workers killed. 5th most dangerous is refuse and recyclable material collection. So as recycling goes up, a lot of those are material and equipment handling stuff and lockout, tagout. You can see the other ones. Next slide. Uh-oh, where is my neck going? Okay, so the next one is the regional fatality statistics. I'm going to go through this pretty quick, but these are for primarily Illinois, Ohio, and Wisconsin for where we have federal coverage. So next slide. Nationwide, throughout OSHA, the inspections we've done has gone up since 2017 and gone down slightly since 2019. You see that compared to the 5,000 fatalities that are out there each year. OSHA does about 20% of the actual workplace fatalities that we investigate, because we don't investigate over the road, we don't investigate workplace homicides for the most part, and we don't investigate farming or mining fatalities. There's other agencies that do that. So, but next slide is fatalities by state. Ohio's in red. Us in Illinois are similar worker population, so we've gone up. 2018 was a really bad year. We had 60 fatalities statewide, worker fatalities that we investigated. Next slide. Fatalities by area office in Ohio. You can see Cleveland's in red. Cleveland had a very low year in 2017, but the last 2 years we had 18 fatalities that we investigated each year, so that's a lot. Next slide. By event, you can see over the years, caught in is the first one. A lot of that's caught in machinery, lockout, tagout. That is where manufacturing in your facilities are affected. You need to have a lockout, tagout program and effective machine guarding. This is where we have a lot of those deaths happening. You can see falls is up there. A lot of that's construction. And then struck by has gone down, which is good, but it still is a danger. That can be forklifts, that can be materials and equipment striking people. So next slide, I mean. This is, the previous one was Region 5, this one's Ohio. So you can see it trends similarly in the caught in and falls. Next slide. This is Ohio fatalities by event. By year, so kind of goes back and forth on those. But caught in is the 2 highest the last 2 years, followed by falls in 18 and 19. And if you see the FY, that's fiscal year. That means October 1st through the end of September. So next slide, Ann. This just gives a pie chart showing where manufacturing fits, construction, and then other include service industries, distribution and trucking, warehousing, tree trimming, landscaping, all are in that green slice. Construction's the blue, and the manufacturing still is high in Ohio, and it's higher in Cleveland too. So next slide. I'm sorry, the first one was region. The next slide is Ohio. So over the past 5 years, manufacturing accounted for just over 1/4 of the fatalities. So next slide. This one I put in, this is the fatalities by month. I don't know if there's a trend, but it seems like construction fatalities obviously will go up in the warmer months. But for whatever reason, we seem to get some high fall ones too in October and November. But I just thought I'd show you that. There's nothing really to present on it. By days of the week, the next slide, Ann. Monday and Friday usually are the two highest for whatever reason. Monday, you're coming off the weekend, and Friday, you're ready to get into the weekend. For whatever reason, that's in Ohio. Usually Monday and Friday nationwide are the two highest days where people get killed on the job. So it's a good time to have a safety meeting to start things out on a Monday and make sure people aren't in a hurry to get home on a Friday. So next slide. By the size of the company, as you can see, 108 of the fatalities in Ohio over the past 5 years were 25 employees or less. And then the next highest is less than 100 employees. So once again, smaller companies that don't have a lot of resources seem to be more at risk for fatal injuries on the job. Next slide. By age, which I talked about, over 50 years old has been an increasing trend, and that's in Ohio. We've seen a lot of people over 50 or over 55 that get killed on the job. Next slide. The falls by height, the reason I put this in there is, more than 60% of the falls are less than 20% where people get killed. Some people think, well, I'm not that high, I don't need fall protection. In general industry, the standard says 4 feet. You have to have fall protection if you're exposed above 4 feet. So if people are climbing on machines or equipment and don't have fall protection, there is a risk. Next slide. And these are the types of businesses that have had the most fatalities in Ohio in the last 5 years. You can see landscaping's #1, and that is mostly tree trimming. Tree trimmers have a higher than normal rate. And then roofing, #2. Roofing matches up with the national statistics. So you can see a lot of it's construction too in Ohio. So Ian, I don't know if you want to ask questions as we go, if you get any, but I'll just keep going if I don't hear you interrupt, okay? Unless everyone's asleep, and that's fine.
No, I think that's a good idea. Since you do have the question slide at the end, we'll address questions then.
That's fine. All right, I'll keep going then. The next slide up here is COVID, because I wanted to talk about a little bit about what we're doing as an agency. And we are actively doing inspections. We are at work. We are social distancing. I'm the only person that works in the office right now where we have put all our people working out of our home. I put a screenshot of the website. This is what you get when you open OSHA.gov. www.osha.gov, and you click on that Learn More slide there of the coronavirus resources, and it's got our actively updated policy decisions, policy memos, and how we're enforcing things. I wanted to highlight a couple things in here as we go. The next slide, if you would. This is a screenshot showing, I took part of that page. I couldn't get it all on there, but you can see on the right, there's enforcement guidance and guidelines for workers. There's the one at the top right, I'll put on the next slide, but it's guidance for the manufacturing industry workforce. So I'll share that with you here in a second, but we've also got the key standards in the middle there that apply for COVID. That includes respirators, personal protective equipment, and then there's the risk and quantifying the exposure, classifying the risk, a lot of different things. And over on the right side, it says enforcement guidance for, and you go down there and those are all the latest memos that we've put in place. We've put in place a lot of different memos that have adjusted our policy for issuing citations related to what we're seeing in this case. For instance, with the respiratory protection being short supply for healthcare workers. We want companies to make a reasonable effort to try to comply with these standards, and a lot of our policy reflects that on the memos. Next slide. So this I took a snippet out of the guidance for the manufacturing industry. So it would be for you guys, and this is what we're trying to do all around. Number one, if you're sick, stay at home. I know there's a lot of people want to go to work, and I was taught to work even when you're sick. Right now, we're not supposed to do that. Try to stagger shifts and distance if you're able to. Social distancing, which is the new norm anymore, which is just crazy. But I mean, it's practicing. We're doing a good job, I think, in this country for the most part. Now, there are some manufacturing facilities that have meat packing that we've seen that have really tight quarters, and we're seeing some outbreaks at those facilities. So that's what we're keeping an eye on for right now. There's considerations for, you know, putting plexiglass shields out or repositioning workstations. A lot of it, you guys have already your line set up, your equipment set up there. It's hard to make adjustments to that, but do the best you can to try to distance workers. You know, allow workers to wear masks. I think it's a requirement by the state of Ohio right now. Use cleaning chemicals and promote personal hygiene. You know, make sure they're washing their hands and using hand sanitizer, disinfectants to wipe off common surfaces. And in the break areas, that's been a big change. I've heard this a lot from companies. You know, it's hard not to sit next to your coworker for lunch. You set up the tables in the workplaces so you get a little more social distance. But we're doing the best we can. This is the guidance for the manufacturing industry. The next slide. There is an OSHA reporting requirement, and I wanted to tie this in to the COVID-19. Right now, if you have a fatality that's work-related or somebody that's suffered a hospitalization or an amputation or loss of an eye, you have to report it to OSHA within 24 hours. So an inpatient hospitalization related to COVID on the job has to be reported to us, and we've got a lot of those reported. We've only in the Cleveland area had one worker fatality that we're investigating related to COVID. It was a maintenance worker in a nursing home. So we are investigating these. Next slide, so 41. These are the record-keeping requirements if you have COVID at your workplace. Now, manufacturing, it's tricky because you know, you're not treating people that are COVID positive, but you may have confirmed cases in there if they're acquired at the work site. And this is your job to make this evaluation. So number one, has to be a confirmed case of COVID-19 as defined by the CDC. And you have to determine if it's work-related. Now, in my mind, the first case of COVID at a manufacturing facility, how can that be work-related, right? I mean, that it has to start somewhere. Now, if you have a cluster and you let somebody work in there, and then next thing you know, you have in all this one department a bunch of confirmed COVID cases. Now you've got the possibility or maybe the likelihood of a work-related incident. So if they are hospitalized, if they're admitted to the hospital as inpatient, or if somebody dies, you have to report that to OSHA. If there is medical treatment, even if they're not hospitalized, you have to record it on your OSHA 300 log. So this has been a challenging one for manufacturing companies, but we've got tons and tons of questions on this. But this is the requirement, and this is what's put on our website. Next slide. I took a snippet out of the enforcement guidance. We will not enforce this except where there's objective evidence that a COVID case may be work-related. This could include a number of cases developing among workers who work closely together without any other explanation, and the evidence was reasonably available to the employer. So these are the cases we're looking at. Obviously, we're going to lean to the side of, if there is a doubt, we're not going to enforce. We're not going to cite you for something that we can't prove it. I mean, it's our burden ultimately to prove it. But if it makes sense that it is, record it and report it. Next slide. This is our general enforcement guidance, the latest. This comes from an April 13th memo. So we should investigate complaints, referrals, and employee-reported fatalities and hospitalizations related to anything that comes about. Now, we've gotten hospitalization reports, we've gotten amputations. We are doing inspections, but we're doing those remotely. We are calling the company and trying to get the documentation and evidence we need without going to your workplace, without exposing our folks to you or exposing you to us. And we are wearing, at a minimum, an N95 respirator for our staff. They do have the option to wear what they were fit for, elastomeric respirators with cartridges on there that give a better level of protection. So if you get an OSHA inspection and they're wearing that level, don't freak out and tell your employees that is our own choice to wear that. But we're doing a lot of phone and fax, and we're doing virtual inspections as much as possible. So it's very helpful to us if you guys can take pictures of abatement, provide us documentation, and email it to us. That will allow us to spend as little time as possible out doing an inspection. But we are doing inspections, so we are at work. Next slide is 44. This is our job site priorities: imminent danger, catastrophes, and fatal accidents, then employee complaints and referrals. For the most part, we're trying to encourage employees who complain to have us do it via phone fax, which isn't an actual inspection. It's called an investigation. So we're trying to do that as much as possible, but an employee does have a right to have an inspection. If we do an inspection, we're going to try to do it as much offsite as we can. Right now, if you receive citations, we are issuing citations every week, and we are continuing to do inspections. When we issue citations, I am holding informal conferences over the phone. So where you could meet with me in the past, if you have ever done an informal conference, and you would come into the office, we're not doing that. We're doing them over the phone. So it's a little weird. I'm trying to adjust. We're actually doing electronic case files, so that's another adjustment for me. I'm embracing technology full speed ahead as best I can, and I know a lot of people are, but our compliance officers are going out. We're doing a lot of construction inspections now. They're low risk, but construction's in full force right now in Ohio, and there are people out there exposed to falls and trenches, which are two of our big priorities. So we are stopping and doing inspections when we see hazards or get calls associated with those. But we haven't done a lot of manufacturing inspections. We've done very few since the COVID outbreak. But we are doing them. If there is a report of fatality, we're going to do it for sure. If there's an amputation, we're looking at those case-by-case basis, whether we need to go out there or not. So it's important for you as a manufacturing company, if you have an amputation or a hospitalization, that you give us as much information you can to tell us how you corrected it or addressed the hazard. That gives us the less likelihood of going out and doing an inspection. So that's kind of where we're at as far as inspections. I did put the next slide. I did put top 10 violations that were out there from the last fiscal year. In manufacturing, lockout, tagout continues to be the #1, along with hazard communication, respirators, powered industrial truck training, and machine guarding's #9, and face protection's #10. So keep an eye on those. You can also go to our website and run the top 10 violations for your type of work, and it can narrow it down to see what OSHA's been citing. Next slide. These are the penalty levels. They go up every year now based on some regulation that went into place about 5 years ago for all enforcement agencies, including OSHA. So right now, the new maximum fine for a serious citation or other than serious would be $13,494 for any willful or repeated violation, up to $134,900, and then failure to abate would be $13,494 per day. So that's our penalties. They keep going up every year. Next slide are the number of inspections we've done with OSHA. I don't have FY19s up there, but we went up slightly. The new administration was pushing us to do inspections and continue to do more. And we're trying to get out there and affect as many people as we can out there. So this year's going to be different because of the COVID, but we are doing inspections, probably not as much for sure based on the COVID. So next slide. I just wanted to show you how we come across and do inspections. This is a manufacturing, but I was working in Milwaukee area office, and right next to him was a building. As you can see, that was the building next to the federal building there. That's like 6 stories high. Next slide. And there was a worker out there without fall protection. As you can see him working on I think it's a heat exchanger or something. But he was out there without fall protection. Don't work in visible sight of an OSHA office without proper fall protection. That's pretty much going to guarantee you somebody's going to drive over there and to do an inspection. So next slide, you can see it was just him out there, what he was doing. Next slide is a closer picture. And then next slide is where we got him into some fall protection equipment. If you can see that where he's tied off to is actually that I-beam that goes across there. That was specifically put in place so that he could tie off to it and not fall off the roof. But he did comply, lesson learned, and his employer probably had to pay us some money. Next slide. I just wanted to touch on the fact that OSHA can do criminal referrals, and I wanted to share 2 criminal cases I was personally involved with. They're in the act, and it puts them at a higher level of proof. Next slide. Oh, it's a repeat of the slide before, so there you go. All right, next slide after that. Slide 55. This is a company in 2012. I had talked to an employee, this Paul Love, reported a fatality at this company where they had some aluminum pipes that they were heating and making, and they were pushing it out of an oven, and it kept falling off these rails. Well, on this particular date, 2 employees were pushing this rack when it fell off and crushed 2 of them. One got seriously burnt and the other got killed. However, what they did was they lied to us and tried to influence the employees there to lie to us. And they had sent emails that we got a hold of that said, warned them like a week before this happened that somebody's going to get killed. Well, those employees changed their statements, and as we found out later, this was directed by their company. So 2 of the employees there and the company itself were charged with conspiracy to obstruct justice and obstruction of justice, which is a felony. Go to the next slide. So that just tells of further, talks about the metal racks, the aluminum racks that weighed between 4,000 and 5,000 pounds. So they devised a plan to lie to the OSHA investigator, lied to me during the meeting in the informal conference, and because it was related to a fatality, the Department of Justice took it on and filed obstruction of justice charges. So the company, next slide, was sentenced on August 2nd, 2019. So the manufacturer's on probation for 2 years for this. So the company got charged, and the next slide is tells you what the obstruction was. They agreed to pay $250,000, and we're on probation for 3 years. So companies can get in trouble. The point here is be honest to your attorney, and the attorneys will protect you as best they can. But if you lie, you can get in trouble. The next slide was one I was personally involved in. This was a November. As you can see, it's an apartment complex with the roof being torn up. This was a site I personally went out to. It was on a Saturday. It was getting ready to rain. It was a football Saturday, so I was getting ready to watch a football game that afternoon and got a call that an employee died in Akron. So I drove over there and met a compliance officer there, and they were up there ripping off this old roof and trying to put down a new one. And the guy was on his 2nd day of the job, slid off the roof and fell to his death. Next slide. The employer, James Kuhn, he didn't provide any safety equipment to Jerry Juarez, and he had been Mr. Kuhn his company had been cited by us 3 previous times and never paid his fine, and still refused to provide fall protection for all his employees. So he was actually sentenced to 3 years in prison for involuntary manslaughter and workers' compensation fraud. So this was a bad case. I actually was leaving the site after we interviewed the workers and took measurements, and I ran into Mrs. Juarez and 2 of her sons looking for his cell phone. It was very sad. She was still in shock, and you know, that's the worst case scenario that can happen. You don't provide fall protection equipment, and the person gets killed. So there are criminal provisions. That's my point. Do the right thing. Next slide. Slide 61. This is whistleblower protections. This is something just to pay attention to. We're exploring new grounds and new territory on our whistleblower things because of people refusing to go to work. They do have a right to file a whistleblower complaint. You may get involved in one, but it's tricky. You can't just refuse to come to work because you don't feel it's going to be safe. You have to give the employer options. You have to report it to them. But if they file a complaint and you're aware that they filed a complaint with OSHA, it's very important that you don't fire them or harass them in any way, because they do have rights in the act. Next slide. This is our whistleblower page, and that's where workers will go to file whistleblower complaints. So I guess my point on that is, you know, do the right thing. If somebody files a complaint, just focus on whether or not you have any issues and fix that. So next slide. That is where I did go to college, University of Notre Dame and the Golden Dome. So I leave that as my parting slide to ask for questions. So I'll open it for questions now, Ian.
Yeah, it looks like there are some questions in the chat room, in the chat box. So we go ahead and read those off. First, it says, glad to see manufacturing is losing its share of fatal work injuries. Do you think this is because of increased enforcement against construction?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. I think number one, manufacturers are doing a better job. I think that they're implementing safety and health programs. I think as they become more lean and more quality focused, safety goes along with that. I don't think, you know, we're trying to inspect construction more because they seem to be more in violation of the standards and more at risk for fatalities. I think manufacturing continues to have machine guarding and lockout as a big risk, but I think more companies are doing a good job in that, and I've seen that up in my area. So hopefully, because there's been more manufacturers going to work, we've seen a slight increase, but the rate's gone down. So I think that's a good sign, because we did inspect after the slowdown in 2008, 2009, that there would be a downtrend in manufacturing fatalities because there were less jobs. But there has been an increase in manufacturing work that's out there, and the fatalities have not followed as close, which I think is a good thing. So I hope it's because you guys are doing a good job out there. So.
Great. And then there's another question here. It says, these inspection priorities are the old ones. Didn't the agency change their priority weighting system?
Well, I mean, you mean for the COVID? I guess that is still our priorities, and I put it up there. We have a new prioritization inspection priority for COVID related. Is that what they mean? I can respond as if that's what they mean. That slide still reflects what the agency's priorities are. Imminent danger, we're going to inspect first and foremost, and then catastrophes and fatal accidents. Those are our top 2. We have to respond within a day on those. That's a goal we personally present. And then complaints and referrals are the next priority. Those are accurate. programmed and follow-up inspections are our lowest priority. However, we have prioritized inspections based on actually going out based on COVID. But that's because we're trying to limit our exposure out in facilities out there. So we are still doing imminent dangers. We do them, we will inspect them. Catastrophes and fatal accidents, we will inspect too. But we're doing less complaints and referrals and serious injuries because we're trying to limit our exposure out there. And if we do those inspections, we're trying to do them virtually. So that would be my answer to that.
Yeah, in the chat box, Howie, he said the question was related to revision to weighting system, and it was from an OSHA report, a white paper from 2019.
Oh, yeah. You actually read that? That's pretty impressive. I'm impressed by whoever wrote that question. You know, so that actually refers to how they're trying to see. Congress gets a report from OSHA and other agencies as to how much work we're doing, so we can try to justify, you know, that we're getting paid taxpayer money and we're doing what we're required to do as an agency and sort of presenting out. We've changed the way we've done that. That makes more sense, and we're prioritizing towards areas where we can make a bigger impact and where fatalities and serious injuries are high. So that's one element of it. But what they've done is we've always counted inspections as one inspection. This enforcement weighting system is a way that we're trying to say, so a process safety management, say a chemical explosion or a plant where we're investigating chemical processes or a refinery. That's a very complex case that sometimes takes 4 to 6 months to do and a lot of resources. So that counting as one inspection, it's saying, and count the same as doing you know, a 4-hour construction inspection by one person. Those both counted the same as one inspection. So what they tried to do was say that process safety management one would count as 6 enforcement units. So it would weight the inspections to show how much resources the agency puts into it. And it's not by prioritizing, but by showing that if we do, you know, if we set a goal to do 10 chemical plants, we're going to put a lot of resources. So it's actually probably about 60 inspections worth of work that we're going to put into it. So that's kind of a quick and dirty look at what the enforcement units are and how that's related. We haven't gone over there fully. We still count inspections too, but we also look at those enforcement units to see how our resources are being used, if that makes sense. I hope it helped a little bit.
No, that's great. Thank you. It says here, we have another question. Are employers required to have employees self-quarantine for 14 days if they've traveled while maintaining social distance guidelines? Do you know?
It's not an OSHA requirement. I think it's a CDC recommendation. You know, CDC, that's where it gets tricky. You know, OSHA doesn't have a standard. We didn't put in place an emergency standard. We are and can enforce CDC guidelines where a company's not making reasonable efforts to comply or do that. So specifically, if an employee puts somebody back to work that was overseas within 14 days, if, you know, that by itself would not constitute a violation. It would have to be a lot more to it than just that. So the short answer is we don't enforce that. We encourage every company to comply with CDC guidelines. And if we have to enforce CDC guidelines or an employer's failure to reasonably follow those guidelines, which puts employees at risk, and there's some kind of outbreak that happens because they're not taking appropriate guidelines, then we could enforce it through Section 5A1 or the general duty clause of our OSHA standards.
Got it. I have another question here, Howie. It says, what can we do when a whistleblower complains that we're not providing hand sanitizer and the like when it is just not available anywhere? Do you follow up on these types of complaints?
Yeah, what I would do is make every reasonable effort and document the efforts that you do. Because, send emails, show a sheet that says it's back ordered. I mean, this has been happening to a number of companies, including us, for our own people. We've got a lab that purchases our, sanitizer and the wipes. Hand wipes are just not available. I mean, not the hand wipes, the sanitizing wipes, the Clorox wipes. They're back ordered for, weeks. And, I would communicate with your line employees, tell them what efforts you're making, try to give them some reasonable options to, sanitize, provide, soap and water is just as effective as hand sanitizer. So frequently wash your hands. If you look at CDC, don't put your hands in your mouth and your nose and eyes. That's where if there's surface contamination. But the primary route of exposure to COVID and coronavirus is through breathing. And so that's where that 6-foot distance comes in, and that's where the face covering comes in, because you don't know if you're symptomatic. It's important that you limit the respiratory output and try to confine it. That's the best thing. And, if you can't get hand sanitizer, communicate to the employees, show them that, and document that you can. If they file a whistleblower, they file it. You've got a defense that you did what was reasonable. So.
Great. And this kind of leads right into the next question here. And it just says, are masks or some type of face covering required? They've given out masks, but their employees do not want to wear them.
This is an interesting question. OSHA does not require face coverings. That is a state of Ohio mandate for all employees. And I believe the Public Health Department and maybe even the State Highway Patrol are doing a certain amount of enforcing those state executive orders. However, OSHA, which is a federal agency, doesn't enforce state mandates. However, if you are required to wear respirators, if you're in a healthcare or a high-risk COVID exposure and you're not providing respiratory protection through our standards, we can issue citations for that. But simple requirement of face coverings and enforcement of their use is not an OSHA requirement. Now, if the CDC recommends them and an employer is not using face coverings and they have an outbreak or they're not taking efforts to minimize or keep people at home, not taking a lot of efforts, there's a possibility we could enforce it, but that would be a case-by-case basis. So I would not say that, no, we would never enforce it, but in my mind, it would be a number of factors that an employer is not making reasonable efforts to protect their employees.
Yeah, and someone just made the comment that cloth face coverings are not respirators or PPE also. Correct.
Absolutely, and that's why the cloth covers are primarily there to prevent you from coughing or sneezing or getting your own germs, because you don't know if you have COVID or not. You hopefully don't. You're not symptomatic, but you may, and that it does provide some protection if it's decent cloth, some respiratory protection, but it is not a respirator. It's not a NIOSH approved respirator. The minimum respirator that you're allowed to use is an N95, NIOSH approved N95 respirator, and that is required for our frontline workers and healthcare workers that are at the highest risk. So.
Okay. Are there any other questions of the group?
Well, I've got another call to hop on at 4. I really appreciate you having me, Rich. I hope it was helpful, and I hope everyone got something out of it. It's kind of weird for me, so I'm not getting any verbal or facial feedback. So if everybody slept, sorry about it, or maybe you needed to nap. If it was okay, good. I appreciate you having me on, and you guys have a great day and good luck. Stay safe and stay working.
Great. Thank you, Howie. I appreciate that. And thank you to everyone for joining us on the call today. We encourage all of you to share with us your thoughts on topics that you'd like to see covered in future calls, and we'll do our best to address those for you. Please stay tuned to your email as we announce our next call. And if there's other manufacturers in your network you think would benefit from this information, feel free to share this with them or let us know, and we'd be happy to reach out. As I mentioned earlier, this call has been recorded, and an archived version will be available on our YouTube channel and in the COVID-19 resources section of our website. Thanks again. Be safe, stay healthy, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon. Goodbye, everyone.